Hey, welcome to another video. In this video today, I'm going to take a look at an entire app that I've built. It encapsulates lots of really cool features. We've got adaptive layouts, consistent branding, custom icons. We're also pulling in data from various data sources from SharePoint, from within the app itself, and also from an external API, bringing it all together in an app. Now the app is made for Dungeons and Dragons, but don't worry if you're not into Dungeons and Dragons. It's just a really good way to have a use case that I can build an app from. I'll have a look at it from the front end, just show you what the different features do from a user's perspective. Then from a developer's point of view, we'll go into the Power App Studio and we'll have a look at how some of those pieces fit together. It's going to be a very high level video, and then what I'll do is I'll create videos later on which will deep dive into a lower level of the actual features themselves, and I can explain them in more detail. So let's take a look. Okay, so let's just quickly talk about the use case. So this is designed for Dungeons and Dragons to be used as an overlay when we're playing in teams. So when we're playing an overlay, the actual users won't see this section in the top left. They'll just see the bottom section and what appears on the right. It basically allows us to keep track of characters and their health and stats. It also lets us keep track of creatures during encounters, lets us look up spells and things like that. So we've got four main tabs up the top here. So this is the character tab, and then we have lots of different characters here which we can select from. We have a search bar, so we can search within those characters. I can use this button here to select or unselect them to be part of the adventure. So at the moment there's 4 people at the bottom. If I say that this character wants to become part, I can click that and it will adapt so that we now have them across the bottom as well. I can also add and remove health from the characters. So we can say take 2 away from Dirks, take 3 away, add 4, return to full health. These other buttons I'll come back to, but then on the other tab here, which for the creatures, so you'll notice that these are custom icons as well that I'm using up the top. Now these creatures tab is actually connected to an API source, which will give us all the information about the creatures. It also has a search feature. We also have a custom creatures tab. So these are creatures that don't exist in that API, but maybe I want to add them into my adventure. Then we have the NPC tab, which is just NPCs or non-participating characters. These are created and I can edit them from here. And then we have a spells tab. And again, this is fully API. So this is going over to the external API and it's pulling in all the information. And again, it's fully searchable. Then we have the encounters tab. So the encounters tab lets me go through adding characters to the encounter, remove them from the encounter, and lots of other things. So if I head back over here to the characters tab, and you can see this button here. If I click on that, it lets me open up the more details about that character. I have an edit button here. If I click edit, it makes it editable. So I can set this character level to 7 and click save, and they'll become a level 7 character, which is shown down here. I can also add in a new character. So let's add in a new character. Character, level 1, hit points 10, max hit points 10, armor class 13, and just save that. So now we have our new character here, which we can edit. And we can edit all our other characters as well. So with the creatures tab, if we go over to that one, well, you notice we also have on the normal creatures an edit tab. Now, as I said, this is actually an external API. However, the external API doesn't come with an image. So this connects the two together. There's a data source that connects the API title with the image that I hold in my database and lets me put the two together. For custom creatures, if I click on the edit form, you'll see I can just store some basic information about the creature as well as an image as well. NPCs, exactly the same. Have an edit form that I can edit the details of the NPC, or I can use the add button and add new ones in. For the spell tab, you'll notice that there isn't an edit and there isn't an add because we don't actually affect or change anything to do with the spells. This is purely for reference information only. So let's go back to the characters tab again. Take a look at our new character that we created. So you notice they don't have an image at the moment. So in order to create an image, we can change the form to edit, click on update image, and this will go to an images data source screen. So here I have lots of different images that have been uploaded. I also have an upload button, so I can click upload there, click on select an image and just find an image to import, give it a name, click upload. And now if I search my images, I should find my new image, which I can click on and click OK. And now that will get added to the character. So if I save that character and say I want that character to be part of my adventure, you'll notice at the bottom that that character has now been added and their image is appearing alongside at the bottom as well there. Now if we head over to the creatures tab, that's exactly what's happening here. So we can edit these creatures and update image exactly the same as we did with the characters, the same with the NPCs. So that all works from the same source. The encounters tab. So this is one of the challenges that I came across, is that when we're working with encounters, we can have characters and creatures in there. Both come from different data sources with different properties. So I had to come up with a solution that allowed me to combine those two data sources and still allow me to edit and update backwards and forwards without having to do that multiple times. So the basic idea here is if I go to characters, I can use this button here to add them into the encounter. So we say our new character is going to be part of the encounter and it will add them in. We'll also add in Len in there. So initially when this pops up for a character, it knows they're a character and it knows that they need to input what we call their initiative, which decides which order they get to play in. Also lets me just update any hit points that I need to update and armor class just in case those aren't correct. Then we can add in some creatures. So if we go over to creatures, if we go and search in the API and we look for everyone's favorite, the orc, then I can add in an orc. So if I click orc, now you can see it's added in an orc and it's put a number next to it. Now this is because if I add 6 orcs in, I need to know which one is which throughout the game so that I can figure out which one needs to have health removed, which one needs to have health added. So what the app is actually doing is if I click that again, it knows there's already an orc, so it adds an orc in with the number 2 and it can carry on going like that. So now once I've added in my adventurers or my characters, I can then go and put their initiatives in and click the save button. Then I can open up my panel on the right, which is my encounter panel. Now, as I said before, the characters or the people who are playing, this will be part of an overlay. So they won't see anything in the centerpiece. They'll only see down the right-hand side and at the bottom. This also allows them to follow the stats and status. So you can see on this right-hand side, we're matching what's at the bottom. We've got these health bars that move up and down based on the maximum health. And I didn't have to tell that how big it was. It's done all that itself. And then we have the creatures, which the characters don't know the health of. So it just tells them if it's healthy. Also goes down as they're wounded or hit. What I can also do is if, for example, I'm going to have a creature that is working with the characters. So say, for example, this custom creature here called Falcon the Hunter. I'll add him into the encounter there. But because my characters are working with him, they should know his health. So I can press this button here and say, show this character's actual health values, and that will change there. Now, I can, if I wanted to in here, change. So let's look at Len, who is at 6 health. I can go in and say, actually, he's at 51 health. Save that. You'll notice it changes on the right-hand side here. It changes at the bottom, and it will have also changed on the actual character's form as well. So now, if I can change them in there, but I don't want to have to keep going in and out of there, because during the course of an encounter, what will actually happen a lot is I'll have to be taking the health on and off of these individual creatures and characters as we go. So what I can do, for example, here is click on Len, say that he's lost 10 hit points, and just take those away. And you'll see it'll update there, and it'll update there, and again, it will update on their character sheet. One thing that it does do as well is Len only has 41 hit points. But let's say I want to take 50. I can just press that. It'll work out that that actually brings him to 0, and it'll punch it to 0. Also the same the other way. If I try and add 60 to him, it will realise that he actually only has 51, so it'll set it to 51. And what it also does is it also will change the colors of the bars based on how much health they have. So once Len drops to a certain level, his bar becomes orange. If we keep dropping him down there, it's difficult to see, but we'll bring that up. You'll be able to see that it goes red. And the same with the monsters. So let's drop 5 off the orc, who's now wounded. Drop 5 off him again, and maybe just drop 3 off of him. And we can see now that he's bloodied. And now if we take all of his health off, we can see that he's dead. So this also has a token system, so we can see whose turn it is. So if I click on here, the token's going to move down. It allows me to just select and show the characters who is actually taking their turn. So the other feature that we have as well is the ability to actually look at the cards for the creatures. So I may want to show my characters while they're playing what Bob, the non-participating character, looks like. So we click on this and we've got a little card that pops up. Tells us that Bob is a gnome drinker midget. And same but slightly similar with the spells. If I want to know how a spell works, so let's look up Fireball, click on here. It's going to give me a description and tell me what I need to do for that. It'll also tell the characters. You can do the same for any of the creatures. So these are my custom creatures. And if we switch over to the API, we can look at one of the API creatures instead. And then we can close those down. It's another really cool feature. So this is designed into tablet format, although it's actually only used on screen. So I've been able to be a bit more free with my spacing. So everything is quite small. I wouldn't recommend, if we were going to use this on a tablet, that we would keep it this size because the icons will be quite small. But what I would do is I'll show you in the deep dive how I've set this up so that actually we can change it really quickly and we can adapt it to how we need it to be. So let's take a look at the back end and how all the different features are working together. Okay, so here we are in the studio. Now, the first thing I want to show you is the branding. So you may have seen or not seen my other video where I talk about consistent branding and how we can achieve that. And I use that within the app here. So I have a separate screen called branding. We have all of these different colors and some other objects as well. These colors are not set directly onto these rectangles. If we go and take a look at the fill, we can see it's got styles.primaryRed. That's because in my app on my on start, I create a record or a collection with records of all my different colors. So I've got primary red, I've got the color value as a hex value. I have red fade, silver, flesh, dark flesh, and color dark. So I set those up there and then I just simply have them on this branding page so I can see them and how they look. And when I'm messing around with my different texts, then I can put them over the top and see how they look. And then also have these branding icons. So you'll notice that these icons don't exist in Power Apps, and there is no way to upload your own icons. So I'm using just a clever technique. These are actually just PNG images with transparent backgrounds. So they were vector icons, but rather than using the full vector icon, which would have taken up the entire square, I've put them into Photoshop, reduced them down so there's a bit of space around the edge, and then I've converted them, saved them as PNGs, and brought them in here. Now what you'll notice that means is, on the main screen here, when I click on each icon, it changes from one color to the other. Now this does involve 2 images. So if we look in the image properties of that image, you'll notice there's an if statement. So if the active tab is the characters tab, then I have a black icon and a red icon. And then what I do is I just have a fill. So the fill is the opposite. So if it's the active, then I use my styles.primaryRed or my styles.dark. And what that just means is each one of these has its own active tab. So active tab creatures, and it will just switch the image from red to black and change the fill red to black. So it gives us the nice look and feel of icons, but we can put our own custom icons in rather than just using the ones that exist in Power Apps. So we just go back to the branding screen. So I've got my 5 different colors. Now I tend to just stick with 5 colors. You don't want to overuse colors because it makes your app look it's kind of messy and the colors don't match. And you'll actually notice I don't use all of these colors. The silver isn't really used in my app. I use the red and black mostly because that's how things manage to work out. The only other brandings I have here, I have some text, so gallery text. And in my galleries, I'll show you later on, I refer to this, the font size. So that means I can just change those sizes. And then this is another set of gallery text. And down the left here, my naming convention is that I've put branding underscore in front of all of these. So I know if I'm going to be looking for one of my branding objects, it's prefixed with branding, which is a really good habit to get into. So now let's take a look at one of probably my favorite features, the adaptive layout. So it may not be instantly apparent to you guys, but this app is actually split into a few different sections. So we have our top toolbar, which runs across the top just here. Then we have our left hand middle section. Then I have our middle section. And then we have our toolbar at the bottom. Then we have our long toolbar, which runs right across the very bottom, which has all of our active characters in there. And then we have our encounter on the right hand side. Now everything exists within those same boundaries and everything fits perfectly. So what I've done in order to do that, rather than having to put the sizes in on every single gallery that I create or every single toolbar, nothing has a set value at all within this entire app. So I create these layouts. So this is my layout. I have a rectangle at the top, which is called section toolbar top. Then I have my section mid left, section mid center, section right, section toolbar bottom, and section bottom. Now I refer to these throughout my app. So everything is set as the width, height, X and Y values of any of these given sections. And anything within those sections then uses percentages of those sections in order to figure itself out. So what you'll actually notice, if we go and look at the width of this section here, I also don't define it by a specific value. I use this function here. So I'm getting the width of the app as it is, and then I'm multiplying it by a decimal place. Now all this does is it converts it to a percentage. So I'm saying I want this to be 35% of the app width. So if that was 1, that would be the entire width. If it was 0.9, it would be 90%. So this is 35%. And again with this one, the width is 0.45%. And then you'll notice for things like height, I have it at 60%. So these are all just percentage. So what that means is you may have before started setting up an app and then changed the resolution on your app and everything has gone absolutely everywhere. By doing it this way, if I change the resolution on my app, the entire app will adjust to fit the resolution that it's been set to. Now this is not dynamic. It does not mean when someone loads up the app and then they move their window that it will change. It's not doing that. It's just the actual resolution setting on the app that will be affected. So if we go back to the main screen, let's take a quick look. So if we look at, for example, this left-hand side here, I have my spells tab gallery. Let's take a quick look at the width. So you can see it's set to section mid-left dot width, and then the height again, section mid-left dot height, and I've set that to 90% of the height because I have my search bar at the top. So everything is referring down to everything else, which means that if this section size changes, this will reduce itself to 90% of that size. And the aim is to try and keep everything in balance. The only thing that I haven't added in here at the moment is the font sizing won't change. So another thing that I just wanted to quickly run through. So with the adaptive layouts that we were looking at, you saw that I'm setting my galleries by size based on the actual sections. But what I also do is, instead of actually setting my templates specific sizes as well, I divide by the number of items that I would like to see in there, meaning if the gallery becomes bigger or smaller, they can adjust with it. Then within each one, you'll see I use the actual template width as a percentage, so half of that template width, meaning that all the way down to my icons, everything uses percentages of everything, meaning that it'll all stay within the same ratio if I change it. A quick example of that, if I go to my layout screen, and the only thing that doesn't work with this font, so I apologize. If I bring that in and pull that out, go back to my main screen, you'll see that the entire gallery on the left hand side has adjusted and the gallery here is adjusted. And obviously this hasn't worked out quite as I wanted because this encounter tab is set to be on the far end of that. So I may need to make some slight changes, but you can see how that works. So if we bring that back out, and then maybe if I wanted to bring in the bottom here, go back to our main screen, you'll see now that this has got a lot more space and these have actually shrunk in as well to accommodate that, and everything has moved back out. So it may be unnecessary because your app may never change, but with a business app they're going to be changing quite a lot. If you go in and create 10, 5, 15 different galleries or different forms, you have to go and resize all the forms. A lot of people do refer from one form back to another form, meaning that the first form has all of the sizes and everything refers back to it. But what if we remove that form? Then we need to set everything back to a different one. This way, it means that we're completely in control. Everything can change a lot more fluid. Just makes everything a lot easier to work with. And by using percentages, we can change the actual resolution on the app, and everything will go back. But I'll do a deep dive into that whole dynamic layout thing as well. So now let's go and take a look at the characters tab. So if we have a look here, we can see that my items here is using a reasonably lengthy but not too difficult to work out function for the item. So rather than just going specifically to the data source, it's actually got a sort by, which encapsulates everything. So I'm sorting by the character name, which puts them in an order. And then I'm using search. So what search does is it goes to look at that data source. I tell it what data to use to search for and then what property to search on. So what they're saying is anything that's typed into the characters search, then go and look in character name and bring me back those, which gives us that search experience as well, which is really handy. So now each of these icons does something unique. So this one is the edit item. So throughout the app, I use a lot of update contexts. I store different contexts and pass them over to various different things. So when this button is clicked, I actually store the item that's clicked in this character edit item. And for purposes I'll explain in the deep dive, I actually store the image ID and the set a variable called form view, plus remove this encounter active. The encounter active shows over the top of where the form would be, so I need to make sure that's shut down. And then I set my form view, which means that then the character form, this one here, let's take a look in the left hand side. Just try and just grab the entire form. Character edit form, if we look at that, it's visible only when the active tab is characters and the form view is characters. So that will pop up. And that's the same for all of these. So if I go through creatures, NPCs, you'll see exactly the same thing. It just sets the form view to the tab that it's set on and the active tab. Now my form here, then if we look at item, is that character edit item. So where I clicked on this button and set this item to character edit item, it's now the one that becomes editable here. So initially the form opens in the view form mode, which is fine because I may not want to edit it. And then I have these buttons here that allow me to interact with the form. Now these icons, there are a couple of different ways that you could do this. You could have an icon for each form that only appears when each form is visible. And that would be good if each form is going to have a different function that it needs to perform when the form is visible. However, for these, it's quite simple. It's just that I want to save a different form every time the button is pressed. So I use these switch statements. So I switched on the active tab, which basically then says, so what is active tab? Is it characters? If it's characters, then perform these functions. If it's NPC, perform these functions. And you'll see the functions are exactly the same, except they refer to different forms. So if it's character, and the character isn't in or is in view mode, then we set it to edit mode. If the form is already in edit mode, then we submit the form. So you can see what happens here. If I click this, when we go into edit mode, it changes to a save icon. which is simply just a switch statement. So if it's characters and the character form is in view, then show settings, otherwise show save. And where we were looking at item, where we were looking at the on select, we can see that now that the form is not view, when I click on that button, it's going to submit the form. Now, this is not fully complete and the user experience isn't great because it just submits the form and the form stays there. Realistically, I need to add something in that then just confirms that that's happened, maybe close the form or set it back to view mode. But it works for my purposes for now. So let's take a look at the images as well. So for the purposes of images in Power Apps, we can refer to them in a couple of ways. We can refer to them by their HTTP URL address, or we can use what are called base64 images, which is basically a long string of text stored somewhere in a database. So for this app, because there's so many images, and because I want to add and remove them in really quickly, I've chosen to use base64 images, which are stored in a SharePoint list with a multi-line text field, and I store the actual string in there and then pull it in and out. And because I'm using images across all of the different tabs, I didn't want to save the base64 image directly into the character or directly into the creature, because I have multiple different data sources, and then when I come to encounters, I then have to store them in lots of different places. So on the back end, if I just open up SharePoint so we can take a look. So here on the back end, I have what are my multiple different databases. I'm using SharePoint just because it's free and it's easy to use. But realistically, for apps as they grow or they work in different sizes, we may start using things like SQL. However, that would require us to have a premium license for Power Apps. So I have my DB characters, which stores the information about the characters. So their name, HP, current HP, lots of different things. And then you see here I have an image ID. If we go to creatures, you'll see we've just got title and then image ID. And again in DB encounter, we just have this image ID. Now that's because I have this DB images database. Now, because of the large amounts of data, it doesn't load very well in a browser, and I rarely refer to it in the browser, but I'll try clicking on it now. This is simply a database that has a whole set of images and their base64 image string. So you can see in there, there's a large amount of data. Now that's actually bigger than what you can see. I then have a title and they will have an ID next to it. So I'm going to get out of that because it will just sit and load and load. But what that means for my app is that all I need to store in my character or in my creature is the ID of the image, and I can then go and look up the images. So you can see here up the top. So the image, if it's blank, this selected image ID, which if we take a look here, is just the image ID from that item. If that is blank, then just put the sample image in. If it's not, then we're going to go and look up the image. So we're going to go and look up from DB images where the selected image ID equals ID. Now lookup will bring back the first record that it finds. If there's multiple items in there that match that, you will always get the first. However, we're using the SharePoint ID, which has to be unique. So there's never going to be more than one. So that brings us back the image record. And then we just take that .base64 image, which here we can see the long string, which will convert it into an image. So what that means is, as well, I don't have to keep doing multiple steps to get to it. It's quite a clean and simple way to do it. So updating the image, what that involves is heading over to a new screen. So if we look at our update image button, it moves over to the image selector screen. So let's head over to the image selector screen. So my image selector screen, I just have a gallery here, which looks up all the different items in the DB images by the title. And we're using, again, that search and sort by columns so that we can search through the images, and we're sorting them in an ascending order. And then we have 3 buttons on the right hand side here. So the first one just goes back to the main screen and resets the search input. This one here actually researches the search input. It goes back to the main screen, but then what it does is it sends back the image to the other screen. So when we do navigate, we can simply end it here or here and say just go back to that screen. But what we can also do, we can send contexts backwards and forwards. So this is sending back to the main screen context the selected image ID as the uploaded image gallery.selected ID. So you can click on these and select, it'll get the ID, and then when we click that button, it'll send it back to the main screen. Now what that means is when we come back to the main screen, that selected image ID will have changed. So in here, that image will be different. But this card doesn't attach to the form, so we're just looking at the image. So what we actually need to do is find a way of saving that back to the data source. So if we go to the character edit form, you'll notice that the image ID field exists, but it's not visible. And that's because I don't want people just putting in an ID. I want them to go to the image selector, click on the image and upload it. But if we take a look at the image ID default, you'll see that it's set to selected image ID. So what that means is when someone clicks on edit, we're actually resaving the image ID again back to the item that we've got. But then when we go down and change an image, so let's see how it runs. Click on update image. We will use this image instead and we click OK. Now when it comes back, the selected image ID is the one that we've just selected, and therefore in that form will also be the selected image ID. So if I click save, that's going to save that back to that form as well. So kind of it doesn't seem like the most developer way to do things, but it's a really simple way. And it works really effectively without too many lookups and without having to do too much complexity. So let's just go back to that image selector screen and look at our other options as well. So the other button that we have here is the upload button. So what this does is it resets the search input and then it updates the context upload screen to true. And in this screen, there is a whole bunch of icons and pieces that aren't seen. If we click on that, you'll see that they now load. And this has the built-in media upload button. So I'm using the built-in upload media button and image button to allow people to click on the select image. Once they select an image, that image then gets stored into the upload image or the uploaded image here. And ask people to put in a file name. And then on select. Now, I won't go into too much detail. I will put this in another post and I'll paste this out. Basically, you'll see online a lot of people who, when they're uploading images to SharePoint, they will actually use Flow to do that. So they'll send it to Flow and then Flow will run through a process to change it into a base64 image string and then put that somewhere where it can be used. Now, in my app, I don't want to have to wait for Flow to come back so that I can use that image. So I actually do that on just the press of a button. So I take the binary, convert it to JSON, and then using these functions mid, find, length, they're just basically methods of looking through the string, taking bits out and adding bits in that I need, and then concatenate it into something that's readable by our Power App, and then updating that. So I patch the DB images source with defaults, which means add a new item with all the defaults, set the title to the name that I've asked to be input here, set base64 image to the string that I've modified here, but just add this string on the front, which makes it readable, and then reset that and update the context so that the upload screen is false, which will then close it down. So I'll go into that in more detail in another app, but basically it just gives you a way of adding images into data sources and then reading them straight back out in the Power App without having to wait for Flow, which for me just makes a much better user experience. And then your image will appear in here. You can select it, click on the tick, and obviously it will get added to that item. So that's a really cool feature. So the API, now let's take a look at our data sources here. So in our data sources, you can see there's a D&D 5e connection. Now this didn't exist in Power Apps or in Office 365. I actually went and created this. So this is a custom connector that's been created. I won't go into detail about how to create those custom connectors in here, but it's quite a straightforward process. There's no coding required. You just use a wizard. You just have to understand a few of the little bits and bobs and how to get that in. But what that means is for my custom connector, I have a few different functions that I can perform. So if we take a look at the gallery for creatures, you see my connect here, D&D 5e, has a get all monsters function. That goes away, gets all the details of all the monsters, and I can use the results to display in my gallery. And then my gallery has lots of different bits of information that come back. So for the purposes of this API, what it does at first is it brings you back a monster name, and it also gives you an index, a URL. So name, index, URL. Then in order to get more information, we have to go and do another request for that specific monster. So rather than going and pulling all the information for all the monsters in one API request, which can be huge, it does a really quick and short call first. And then when we actually do more things with it, so the one that adds it to the encounter, you'll see I use a different request. So my D&D 5e has a get monster, and in this one I pass it the index of the monster I want to get. And what that will do is that will bring back a record which has much more information in, so hit points, armor class, lots of different things. So I'll talk about what that does in a second, but basically that's my custom connector. Same again with the spells. So the gallery itself, if we take a look at the gallery and the items, it uses the D&D 5e get all spells function, which then it just displays in a gallery. And then when I want to show them, I use the D&D 5e get spell, which uses the index of the item that's been clicked on, and it goes and gets more information and passes that back. Okay, so one of the cool things is the encounter and how the encounter works. Now, I built this a couple of times in different ways. Initially, the first way I did it, it was slow to work because I was having to, in my gallery for my encounters, go and look everything up. So one of the things we need to watch out for when we're building galleries is everything that we do in the template has to happen every time for each cell that we look down on. So if we're going to one data source and we're just looking at each record's name, that's fine. But if each one has to go and do a search and a lookup of another data source, then that's going to have to happen 10, 15, 30 times. And the problem is it can get very slow very quickly. So what I actually do here is I have my, as you've seen, the API source. I have my sources for my characters, which are in SharePoint databases. And then I have a separate SharePoint database in here for the encounter. Let's have a look. So here, but this is actually more for storage once the app closes, because the app doesn't retain the information. Rather than saving it to the device, I just keep a record in the background so that every time it loads, it can go back to the point it was at before. However, the actual data source on here is actually what I call an encounter cache. So I've created a collection in the app itself, and I bring in everything from the encounter and I do all of the lookups as I build that encounter cache. So let's take a look at, firstly, remind ourselves what this is doing. So if we go to the encounter here, so let's just remove some of these. So this gallery here links again to the encounter cache. So, but if I go to the character here and click on this button, you'll notice that it doesn't update the encounter cache. So it patches DB encounter. So it creates a new item in DB encounter and it sends over title, character ID, a bunch of different stuff that we need to know for it. If we go to creatures, have a look at creatures, we can see exactly the same thing. So we we'll come back to that. So we go and get the actual creature, as I said before. We go and get the information for the creature that's linked in the database. So we can get its image ID, and then we patch the DB encounter, and we add title, creature name, and all the different things. But we're using the creature to add and lots of different stuff here. And then you'll notice at the bottom I have this select, refresh, encounter cache. So this select function says go to an object and run its on select. Now, the reason I do this is because there are multiple places where this same set of code runs and it's exactly the same. And I don't want to have to repeat it 4 or 5 different times. If I need to change something, I have to come back and change it 4 or 5 different times and things can get messy. So where I have multiple reuses of the same code, I put them into a single object. So if we just have a look through here, so we can see there's a button here, which is actually hidden down the bottom called refresh encounter cache. Now this does a clear collect. Now clear collect means empty this collection, which I call the encounter cache, and then go through and add. Now the for all also then says for every record in the DB encounter data source, which is my actual SharePoint data source, add a record for each of these. So it goes and it adds in a new record and it sets all of these different items up. So also, if is character means if the object that was added was a character, then we need to set certain things. So we need to look it up from DB characters. Otherwise, we just set it to the max HP, current HP, armor class. So what that's doing is, rather than referring to the encounter, just in case their health has changed at any point from anywhere else, it goes and checks the actual character itself. So it's going to add all of those in. So then what that means is every time I actually add this, it adds that to the encounter database, and then it refreshes my encounter cache. Now it may seem like that's a long process, but realistically it's because by design, initially we add in 10 orcs. So that's 10 times we're refreshing that cache. 1, 2, 3, 4. But once it's done, we don't need to refresh that cache anymore. That cache can stay, and these images don't need to continually reload. If I was looking up these images in every single gallery here, you would see this acting really slowly. However, it doesn't. We can add them in and they come in a lot quicker, almost like a flash. It's a much smoother performance, and that's what we're aiming for. We're always looking for the user experience to be the best that it can be. So that's using multiple different data sources. So we've got API as well as our data sources, as well as a collection within the actual app itself. So we're combining the three to come up with something that works. And I'll go into more detail on that in another video as well, so you can understand exactly why I've done that. So then what we have to be wary of is for a character. Let's add in a character here. Now for a character, their health has to be updated in multiple places. So just save him there. So this character now exists in the encounter cache, exists in the DB encounter, also exists in their character database, and we're showing them at the bottom, showing them on the right, and we're showing them here. So if I click on here and just take 2, so like we saw before, you'll see that drops to 37, that drops to 37, and if we look at their form, that drops to 37 as well. So again, it may seem like a lot of work, but actually it's more efficient than some of the other methods that I was working with, and that is that this button will actually do a few different things. So firstly, in order to work out whether we should be giving them those hit points or taking them away, we create a new context called new HP, and I just check if their current HP minus what we're going to take away brings them to 0 or less, just set it to 0. Otherwise, actually make that change. And then I use this concurrent function. That's because, as I said, I need to go and update the DB encounter for 1, which is the data source for the encounter. If they're a character, I need to go and update the character's data source as well. And then I also want to patch the encounter cache. Now, it's reasonable to ask, why am I not just refreshing the counter cache every time? And that's because the removal of health, add-in and takeaway actually happens quite a lot. So I don't want to have to keep refreshing the counter cache. It would actually be counterintuitive. When I'm adding monsters in, I may click the button 10 times and be done with it. But during the case of a counter, I can update their health 20, 30, 40, 50 times for different monsters. So it makes a little bit more sense to just patch that individual record every time to smooth up the process. Now, by using this concurrent function as well, it means that these 3 functions will be completed all at the same time. So if I didn't use that, it would patch the DB encounter, wait for that to complete, go and patch the DB characters, wait for that to complete, and then go in and patch the encounter cache. What this actually does is it sends all 3 requests at the same time. So what that results in is a really quick update. So you'll see 37, it's almost, you can see a slight delay, but I mean, it's barely noticeable. It happens pretty much as quick as we need it to happen without the users being affected. So yeah, so one of the other things that I wanted to show you is the counting of the creatures. So as I said before, when we add an orc in, let's just get rid of this one. It adds in and it's orc number 1. And then when we add another one in, it's orc number 2. And this is so that we know which orc is which. So nothing too clever there, but you'll notice that on my add button for the orc, I use this clear collect function at the top. So I collect a source of creature count, and it basically goes to the encounter and filters all the monsters where the title is the same. Then when I add them in, I add it in as counting the rows of that source and adding 1. So if there's 1 orc, it finds 1 orc and it says, okay, there's 1 in there, add 1 to that. That means this is number 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and so on. So really simple little technique just to do that. The other thing I do is initiative. Now in Dungeons and Dragons, when we start an encounter, everyone has to roll a d20 dice so that we know which order they get to play in. The monsters, rather than actually rolling them, the app's going to randomize that for me. So I have this CTG random initiative number. Now it's actually hidden. Let's just close this down. CTG random initiative number. Now this uses the random number variable. So it takes 1 plus a random number, times it by my lower and upper ranges and reduces it down to 0. Again, I'll go into more detail on that, but this is just basically a way of getting a random number between 2 points using the random number. Now this random number is updated at the end of every add. So when it first loads, random number is just a random number, but then every time we set random number to rand, and rand gives you a number between 0 and 1. So it's a decimal place number, and we're just using some maths to convert that into a whole number between some ranges. So that's how that works as well. So what that means, you'll notice initiative when these are added. Every time it will give me a different number. So 15, and again 16. Now with characters, we don't have to worry about that. They roll for themselves. So if I add in a character, it gets put in as a character. So is character, and it sets edit mode to 1, meaning that it's setting this edit up. Now within here, all that happens is there are these text inputs, and if the form is set to edit mode 1, they're editable, otherwise they're just viewable. So for this one it's editable, and this button here just switches the item between edit mode and not. So if this item is not in edit mode, then we're going to update it to be in edit mode. However, if it's not in edit mode, then we need to make our saves. And again, I use this concurrent function, and I just go and say update the encounter cache and update the encounter, and then go and update the character if it's a character, and update the creature if it's a creature. So this looks complicated, but it's just a couple of different if statements that are patching the different records concurrently. So then we can click save, and that's what we'll see there. And then for this one, just add in 3 and click save. So now the cards. So as you saw before, for each creature I can click on this and it's going to load up a card. Now that really simply just goes and gets all the details it needs. So here we go, look up the monster, get the ID of the image that we're going to look up, and then it's got this active card record which just holds the image, the name and description. It's going to set the view card to either the spell or the normal card, and then over here, just clear this off, I've just got not even within a gallery, just a set of objects that then have those in. So I've got a frame, an image, a close button, and they're all set to be visible when view card. And then the image, for example, is set to the active card record image. So really simple. So I can close that down, open that up. Now, one of the things that you'll notice that I have done in here is I go and get the image ID variable here and then use it here. So I'm doing quite a few update contexts. Now, I'll go into more detail on delegation. For those of you who know or don't know, it basically means that when some requests that we send off to the database happen on the database side, which are a lot quicker and more efficient and can happen even if there's more than 500 records. If it's not delegatable, then we're going to have some performance issues and potentially we're not going to be getting the records we look for. If we try to do this lookup here for the image ID at the same time as comparing it to another lookup, it thinks it's non-delegatable. So for example, if I was to put that in there instead, it's going to tell me that it can't do that delegation. However, if I up front just go and get the ID, this is set to a single integer, I can make that comparison and it becomes a delegatable function. So another little trick just to get around some bits. So now I can collect all my information from the database side really quickly and then just send it over to my card, which is perfect. The icon on the right hand side that we can see here for whose turn is it is literally quite simply, let's put it back up here, just another one of my images that I've created. I've just put a dotted border on it that's quite thick so it looks slightly different. It's got this kind of feel around it, set the background color, and the only way, all I've done then is when we go and look at the visible, let's have a look at it here, you'll see that I'm using the encounter active gallery, which is the gallery on the right here, .selected.id equals this item ID. So again, pretty simple. And I have this button which closes and opens the encounter gallery on the right hand side. And you'll notice the icons at the bottom change based on a couple of things. So which tab is active, and if the encounter gallery is active, these ones appear, and if it's not, these ones go down. If there's a form active, we see the delete and save. And the delete just has a little pop up here that has a yes, no. Now these are just a simple remove function that I use. So remove the current item that's being edited from the current form if we need to, or don't. That's a quick look at the app and all the different things that it does. I didn't want to go into too much detail, but what I will do is I'll break out each individual feature and show you a bit more about how those work and how you can make them work in your app. So yeah, I hope that was helpful. And what I'll also try and do is I'm going to make the app available as a download so you can import it into your environment. I'll also make the custom connector and the data sources available as well. I have to wait and go through some more videos Once we get the videos up and running for each of those to show you how to install and run them, then I'll make all of this available to you as well. Thanks for watching. I hope the video provided some value for you. If it did, please remember to like, share and subscribe to my YouTube channel. Also head over to my website, www.fluid-sharepoint.com. Follow me on LinkedIn and Twitter. If there's any content you'd like to see in future, please let me know.